Hi, everyone, and welcome to this very short course called Finding the Right Solution Story for Your Investigation. My name is Tina Rosenberg, and I am the co-founder of the Solutions Journalism Network. This course will be in 4 small installments of about 5 minutes apiece, and after each video, your instructor can pause and have a class discussion about how to use this information in your own investigations, and then go on to the next video. The first video will look at the advantages of including a solutions angle in your investigation. But not all investigations will lend themselves to a solutions angle. So in the second video, we'll learn 2 questions to ask yourself so you can determine whether yours does. In the third video, we'll talk about a system for finding the right solution story for you. And in the fourth video, we'll look at what to do if it appears like there's no possible solution story that's right for your investigation. Ready? Let's get started. So, why include a solutions angle? First, let's talk about what a solutions angle is. And it is very simply part of an investigative series that talks about who is doing better with the problem under investigation. And here's a couple of examples from various investigations that show what the solutions angle is about. And it's often something that's comparable. If you're investigating the actions of a city, it's another city. If you're investigating the actions of a hospital, it's another hospital, etc. But who has better results or who has greatly improved in how they've done it. It's very simple. You are telling the story as not as fluff, but as real journalism, looking at what works about it and what doesn't work about it. So why should we make that part of our investigations? The first reason is to take away the many excuses that people have for their bad behavior. Of course, you will investigate those as part of your series, right? So very often local officials can dismiss investigative reports by saying, oh, this is a terrible problem, but we're doing the best we can. Including a solutions angle puts the line to that. It takes a problem that can be dismissed as inevitable and shows that it's actually unacceptable. Your investigation shows that something has gone wrong. Your solution story shows that it doesn't have to be that way. And that is often a very, very powerful part of the story that profoundly embarrasses local officials. Let's look at what 2 investigative reporters have said about how they used their solutions angles. This is Bree Zeltner from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, when there was a Cleveland Plain Dealer, and she was one of the reporters on a story about lead paint in Cleveland. And the paper had done several series on lead before. But this one, in addition to doing the traditional investigation, also looked at what other cities around the Midwest were doing that was working. And I'll let you read what Bree said. Okay. Rhiannon Myers, when she started her career, was at the Corpus Christi Caller-Times and did a series on diabetes because Corpus Christi was in the county with the highest amputation rates in the United States. And look at what she said about the solution stories. You can see that far from being fluff, these stories were the meatiest ones, the ones that provoked the most conversation, and the ones that are most profoundly embarrassing to public officials. So the second reason to include a solutions angle is to create excitement and hope. Not false hope, but real hope, because you're doing a story on someone who is actually doing better about the problem under investigation. So I think we all know in our hearts why that matters. And the big reason is people tune out from the news because of the relentless negativity. They need something different. The Reuters Institute does a digital news report every year. They have found these things during the pandemic, the American Centers for Disease Control issued a warning that people should take breaks from the news. They considered it a mental health issue, that the news was so negative that it was depressing people. So this is probably not a surprise. You probably know a lot of people who react this way when you say you're a journalist, and you probably feel this kind of thing yourself. Many journalists do. Well, last year, the Reuters Institute asked a new question of people who avoid the news, which is, what would make you tune back in? And what they said was they want positive news or solution stories. In other words, the Reuters Institute said they want the news to be a bit less depressing. Now, the news is depressing, right? We don't want to sugarcoat things. We don't want to give them fluff. But adding a solutions angle to an investigation is a way to make news less depressing, to provide that hope while sticking with real hard-hitting journalism. Third reason to tell the whole story. Our job as reporters is to hold a mirror up to society, to help society change. If we only show what's not working without showing how people are solving those problems, this is a distorted mirror. And we are harming society by not giving important information that people need. One example is the Ebola epidemic from 2014. We all remember the 3 countries in Africa, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, who had these terrible cases of Ebola. And billions of people across the world knew about this and panicked with headlines like these, right? But here's what people didn't know, that the neighbors of those 3 countries, Nigeria, Senegal, and Mali, contained Ebola with good practices and had caseloads in double or even single digits. That would have been important to know, right? How many people knew back then or know now that we have a vaccine for Ebola? How many people know that there's a cure? We're not telling the whole story if we leave that out, and we're giving a distorted picture of reality. So let's stop there and discuss. And when you're ready to come back, you know where to find me. Thank you. So welcome back to finding the right solution story for your investigation. In this video, we're going to talk about whether a solutions angle is even possible for my investigation, because it isn't for everyone. So the answer is, it is if you can answer yes to these 2 questions, and they're very simple. Are you investigating a problem that's widely shared? A widely shared problem is one that lots of different people are trying to solve, and some of those responses are going to be more successful, more innovative, worth reporting on. The other question is this an individual act or a systems failure? If you're reporting on the actions of one single individual, there's probably no solutions angle possible. But if there's a system involved, and that's a big part of your investigation, then yes, the answer is yes. Now let's take a little bit, let's dig into that a little. Here's some examples of stories that a solutions angle would not work for, and you can take a look at them. So these are stories where you're talking about the behavior of a single individual. And these are, in some cases, really sui generis. You're not going to find another example of documents being hidden at a place like Mar-a-Lago. You'll find that they have something else in common too, which is that these kinds of themes are the classic fodder for investigative reports. We love doing stories about corrupt or abusive officials. That is almost synonymous with investigative reporting in some circles. I think I know what you may be thinking about this, which is that they don't have to be not systemic. An investigation of a corrupt cop is a bad investigation if it doesn't talk about the departmental policies and departmental culture that helps that cop to be and stay corrupt. It is a systemic. And one of the great advantages of thinking about solutions from the beginning is that it helps you to deepen your reporting and focus on the system's failure behind it. Very little is purely a one-person problem. Now let's look at some examples of stories where a solutions angle is appropriate. Okay, so instead of investigating whether the CFO of the hospital is stealing money to buy his yacht, you could investigate why the hospital lacks basic medicines. Let's say the kids in your school district get out of 5th grade and they still can't read. And here's the police department again. The department is not disciplining abusive cops. Your public contracting system is one that permits and even sometimes encourages kickbacks. The food we eat is contaminated by dangerous bacteria. Labor, working conditions, farm workers get few breaks even in deadly heat. All of these are widely shared problems and they're failures of the system. But you'll note they have something else in common as well, which is that they are all about problems that affect people's daily lives. That's the second advantage of looking at solutions early on, which is it broadens the focus of investigative journalism to include coverage of what is affecting people's daily lives. What do you think your readers would be more interested in? That the CFO of the hospital was stealing money, or that the hospital lacks basic medicines and why? In my opinion, it would be the second one, because that's what affects their lives. These kinds of investigations are often not considered first-class investigation, but I think they are, and they're very important and they're very relevant. So it's time for discussion again. Let's talk about how this applies to what you're working on, and when you're done, come back and we'll see you again. Welcome back to Finding the Right Solution Story for Your Investigation. In this video, we will talk about a system for finding the right solutions angle for your investigation. The big principle is to look for the system. I once attended IRE, the Investigative Reporters and Editors Conference, and I was talking about investigating corrupt cops, and someone came up to me and said, "So what's the solutions angle? Am I supposed to write a story about a clean cop?" The answer is no. But you can look for another department that had been corrupt and cleaned up. You're always going to be looking for the system that is better or greatly improved when you're looking for your solutions angle. So you've seen these as examples of solution stories. Give you another quick look. And here's a few more. Let's talk about one of them, how Baltimore cut its infant mortality rate. Saving the Smallest was another investigation by Bree Zeltner from the late lamented Cleveland Plain Dealer. It was about Cleveland's problem with infant mortality, and she went to Baltimore, a city very similar to Cleveland that had had great success with a program called Be More for Better Health, I think, or Healthier Babies, Be More for Healthier Babies. And after she did this series, Cleveland invited the leaders of the Baltimore program to come to Cleveland and talk about what they did. Cleveland then adopted the Baltimore program and is having the same success that Baltimore is having. So this was a way for her investigation to have much more impact with the solution story. One thing I like about the Mississippi headline and the Rwanda headline is that they're somewhat surprising. We tell people doing investigations where they're looking for an international comparison to step away from Scandinavia. Healthcare. This was a story about universal healthcare coverage, and it could have been set in Norway, but instead it was set in Rwanda, which has universal healthcare coverage. Much stronger story, much more interesting story, and much more shaming of the United States for not having it. So what we're going to be looking for when we look for our system is what we call a positive deviant. Normally for us, the word deviant means something negative, but we want you to look at it in a positive way. The deviant is someone who's doing better with the same resources. And to find the positive deviant, you can ask who's doing a better job or who has notably improved. They may not be at the A+ level now, but maybe they went from a D to a B-. That's very interesting. How did they do that? That could make them a positive deviant. So probably the easiest and most straightforward way of finding the positive deviant is by looking at databases. The same database that's going to tell you who the worst performers are, if you trust that database, will probably also tell you who the best performers are. And it's interesting to write about those. It's also very interesting to write about both. These are two examples that come from a database of C-section rates in hospitals in New York State. And you can see that two hospitals in the same hospital system had very different C-section rates. One of them was Good Samaritan in West Islip and had nearly 50% C-section rate, which is very bad. Another one, Good Samaritan in Suffern, 18.4%, which is very good. So it would be a very interesting story, not only to investigate why Good Samaritan has so many C-sections, but how Good Samaritan in Suffern was able to achieve having so few. So data, that's the most straightforward way to find your positive deviant. But sadly, many things are not covered by data, especially in resource-poor countries. It can be very difficult to find data on what you're interested in. So another way of doing this is by talking to people, not necessarily people who are on the ground. You want them, of course, later on, but in the very beginning, you want people who have the airplane view so they know about what's happening in a wide variety of places. And ask them our two questions: who's doing a better job and who has notably improved? This was the method I used to do the story, the investigative piece that was the most important of my career. In the year 2000, I was working for the Sunday magazine of the New York Times, and I wanted to do a story on the price of the new antiretroviral AIDS medicines, which had been out for 5 years. Now, they were so expensive that people in resource-poor countries were paying the same amount of money as people in rich countries, 10, 12, sometimes $20,000 a year, which basically meant they were inaccessible in those countries. So the countries with the highest AIDS burden, AIDS was a death sentence for people, while it was a chronic and manageable disease in wealthier countries. That was widely known, but what was not widely known was the why. And the why was collusion between the pharmaceutical industry and the government of turn in Washington to put political pressure on countries so they would not make or buy generic versions of these drugs. So I thought this was a pretty important investigation, and I pitched it to my editor, and he said no. He said, it's too depressing. Everyone knows that everybody with HIV is going to die in Malawi, and it's not fresh enough. So I went home and I rethought the story. There was, I had learned, one country that was doing things differently, and that was Brazil. Brazil was fighting back against the pressure it was getting from the pharmaceutical industry and from Washington, making its own generics and providing them for free to everyone in the country who needed them. And in Brazil, people could expect to live normal lives with HIV. So I turned the story inside out. And I said everything I wanted to say about the bad behavior, but it was done through the lens of talking about what Brazil was doing. This was a much better way of telling the story. First of all, got into the paper. Second of all, it was fresh. It was something that people didn't know, and it was exciting to people. Something hopeful about HIV back when there was very little hopeful about HIV. And it had a lot of power because it showed that it was possible for resource-poor countries to manage antiretroviral medicines. This was not only the most important investigation I've ever done, it was also the one that showed me the great power of a solutions approach. So let's pause and talk about that information and how it can apply to your own work. And then we'll come back for our last installment. Welcome back to Finding the Right Solution Story for Your Investigation. In this installment, the last one, we're going to talk about what to do when there is no clear comparable solution story. Here is a delicious blueberry pie. You're investigating that blueberry pie, and you're looking for another pie that's doing better. This metaphor is not working. Anyway, let's say you can't find that. You can't find another place that's doing better overall. What you need to do is cut a slice of the blueberry pie and look for a positive deviant who's doing better on what that slice represents. Are you with me? So, an example. Every problem is made up of tons and tons of smaller problems. And you need to look at which are the important small slices in your area. What are the ones that are causing the problem that you're reporting on? And look at those and find out what the positive deviants are that you can use for a solutions angle. Example, let's go back to the primary school where children can't read. Let's say overall you can't find a solutions example, which I doubt because you probably can. But let's say you need to find the small slices. So you've decided that in your area, the important slices are what we've listed. Class size is too large, teachers are poorly trained, curriculum is bad, et cetera, et cetera. For each one of those, you can look to find a system that is doing better or has notably improved elsewhere and do your story about that. So that's one way of slicing the pie. There are other ways. Another way is to choose an applicable adjective. Write down what is actually wrong with the thing you're investigating. If it's too slow, then look for who's faster. If it's too expensive, look for who's cheaper. If it's inequitable, look for who's more just. If it's inaccessible to people, look for who's reaching everyone. It's very easy to do. Just describe to yourself what are the adjectives you would use on your problem, find the reverse, and look for the positive deviant. And finally, one other way of searching for a small slice is by who's being served. If you can't find a positive deviant for who's helping the entire population, you might be able to find one that's helping a small slice of the population, like these: seniors, Latinos, rural counties. Any subset of the population can lend itself to being a small slice and providing you with that solution story. And of course, just as problems are made of tons of smaller problems, you can use more than one, more than two. You can use several of these small slices for solution stories in your investigation. So that's it for our very short course on finding the right solution story for your investigation. We will make these slides available to you if you want them. Thank you so much for your interest, and best of luck.